In 2020, Dwayne and Anthony Staedtler of Stateler Family Farms in Macomb attempted for the first time on their operation applying liquid swine manure on a standing corn crop. In conjunction with the Ohio State University Extension and USDA's Agricultural Research Service, the Staedtlers took an in-depth look at how implementing this practice on their farm would impact crop yields, farm economics, and downstream water quality. We follow up with them after the 2020 growing season to learn from their experience.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dale Minio from the Ohio AgNet. Joining me, three gentlemen today. We're going to be talking about the events up at the Staedtler Farm in regard to the Blanchard River Demonstration Farms project. Joining me, Glenn Arnold, Field Specialist at OSU Extension in Manure Management Systems. Anthony Staedtler, who will be talking about the farm in and of itself and what we've been working on, and Greg Labarge, Field Specialist, Agronomic Systems, OSU Extension. So, Glenn, if we're going to follow notes, I better start with you. Let's talk a little bit about the economic differences between the manure side dress versus 28 that was experienced here on the farm.
Well, Staedtler's had a very dry growing season, but we got the manure side dressed as we typically do about 10 acres an hour. We got that done because of the dry weather, and manure usually excels in these conditions. We were about 20 bushel better on our manure reps than what we were on the 28 reps. So the yield improvement was really helpful. And then the nitrogen, of course, is a product that the livestock owner already has.
And that makes it very useful to be able to incorporate that into the system. What changes to equipment have been made to make this kind of practice possible on the Staedtler farm?
The Staedtlers, primarily the only thing they really needed was a toolbar that was set to go down the corn rows to do the manure application. Staedtlers used their own tractor. They used the toolbar that was available from the university. And then the other manure technology, as far as transferring the manure to the site, using the frac tanks and the drag hoses, that's all pretty common in the industry at this time.
When you talk about common in the industry, how common is this practice across Ohio?
Well, it's growing. There's a lot of interest in it, but there's two major holdups to that. Number one, there's not a lot of side dress equipment available out there that's set up and ready to go. And then secondly, the majority of the liquid manure from the larger farms is handled by commercial manure applicators. And most of them are not set up to go down through corn rows. They have larger tractors, they have wider tracks. They're just not row-ready equipment that they're able to make the change over. So it'd be difficult for them to make that change until they know there'd be enough corn acreage to justify the equipment investment.
And also probably need to have enough of their own manure or manure access in the area to make that work?
I think that's a real possibility, but the early adapters of this practice have been primarily people who have their own manure source, and they're looking at it differently than they did just a few years ago. They think there's a lot of potential to use this manure in this manner. It's about as good as you can do for the environment, and it certainly make economic sense as well.
Last question for you then, Glenn, and we could take it either of two ways here. One, do you want to talk a little bit about what adjustments you need to make to that equipment to be able to make it work? Or is it more important once you've got the equipment ready to go that we do specific things in the field?
Well, I think for people who are wanting to make this adaptation, you can plant your fields as you normally do. So that's certainly not much of a challenge. We try to wait till the corn's emerged so we know we have a reasonable stand to work with. I think the biggest adjustment is trying to work with other people, trying to work with either your neighbors, your relatives, or someone to make the investment in the equipment you need so that you can go forward with this technology.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Anything else I didn't know to ask and should ask?
Just this, the results we had at Staedtler's mirror the results we had in most areas of the state this year. It was a little bit drier than normal. We had really good, 10, 12, 15 bushel advantages for the manure over the corn. And we usually always win, but this year was a better year than most we've had.
All right, let's move on to Anthony Staedtler. Anthony, thanks for joining us this morning. How would you describe the economic differences as you looked at the operation? I mean, we can always look at bushels, but is there anything else to look at economically as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you look at what we did with having the frac tank and the semis coming over, it basically comes down to time and how how you're able to get things done. You know, when we're tanking during the summertime or the fall, or if we were to do it in the spring, we do about an acre an hour is what we would average. But having the frac tank and using Glenn's type of mode that he's been going to at the semis, you know, he said, you know, we were able to get up in that 8 to 10, you know, acre time period. With the corn being needing to be before, you know, V5, V6, before you really do any damage to it. You know, time is of the essence of that. So being able to use the frac tank really helps out a big time, you know, in order to be able to get things done in a timely manner.
Just for comparison, what was your time frame to put on UAN 28 as it relates to acres per hour?
We can get roughly 20 to 25 acres an hour, you know, with 28 or with anhydrous. So it's about half of that. But when you look at the economic, and like Glenn said, you know, this year with us being as dry, for what we've seen coming out was incomparable, you know, to the type of year that we had with the dryness.
We looked at the overall year as dry. What was it like when you actually were doing the application?
Yeah, actually, our spring, you couldn't have written it to be any better for our spring. But about a week after we got everything applied, then we just turned dry. And you go another, you know, 3-4 miles north of us, and they had half of what we had, you know. So, you know, when we look at what our UAN, our anhydrous did, you know, at roughly 103 to 110 bushel an acre to what we did with pre-applied manure, whether we side dressed or pre-applied it here at the home site, we were right in that 130 to 140 range. So it definitely paid for itself, you know, of taking the time to have the semis there and everything.
As we looked at 2021, then, based on your experiences so far with this type of project, what do you planning to do this year?
Yeah, we're going to do the same thing. However, we're going to do 60 acres across the road from our place, to where we don't have to have the semi tankers or anything. We can just go right underneath the road with tiles that we've got there and be able to basically replicate exactly what we did. Instead of it being 30 acres, this time it'll be 60 acre field that's right across the road. And then next year, we're starting to, for 2022, we've probably got about 120 acres or so that we're going to do this, and we'll have to get the semis around at that time. But, you know, I think it will be a little bit easier. The semis will be able to run for a full day instead of just a few hours on a, you know, a 30 acre field, and be able to get a couple fields knocked out over at mom and dad's and kind of towards our farther fields there.
Can you give us an economic equivalent on the UAN 28 versus the manure when it comes to actual nutrients being put on for the plants?
Yeah, this year, with everything that went into it at 390 corn, we were right at net return on the 28, ended up being about $70 difference, even with the cost of the application of the semis that we had to have hired in and everything. So, you know, $70, especially in this year, is you know, any year is beneficial.
Did you nutrient test the manure to know what was in it?
Yeah, so we nutrient test our manure all the time. We do this year. We end up averaging right around 5,800 to 6,000 gallon an acre on that, which on the flip side is about a 3-year crop removal for what our manure tests are. So given that, we won't have to really come into that field at all for another couple years to put any nutrients on there.
Anthony, thanks for joining us today. Let's check in now with Greg Labarge, field specialist, agronomic systems. So Glenn gets to work with the manure. You get to work with the agronomic systems. What all does that include?
Well, that includes, I think, tracking just a little bit more what's going on from the agronomic aspects, looking at the health of the crop, looking at some of the soil test results, and then trying to think about it from a water quality aspect, from a manure application standpoint.
So it was a dry year. Any pros and cons one way or the other?
You know, actually, I think the pro here with this system is the idea that overall, we're reducing the amount of nitrogen going into the system. When we're working out there with a fall applied manure product, we're losing that nitrogen, a lot of it over the winter months, whereas when we're putting it out with the crop can fully attain that. So we're able to reduce the amount of commercial fertilizer by 80 to 150 pounds per acre going into the system by using the in-crop. Obviously, that would seem to relate to water quality improvements, because we're reducing by 80 to 150 pounds the amount of nitrogen going into the system overall. This is one of the edge of field sites, so as we get further along, we'll have some data to substantiate that. We certainly, when we looked here at this particular site in season, comparing the 28 to the manure application, the nitrate levels in the soil were very similar. We did an at season or at the end of season after harvest soil test. There we did see where the manure had about 24 parts per million versus 8 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. Fortunately, with Staedtlers, it's common for them to use cover crops. They have a rye cover crop out there, so that may help mitigate it. We didn't get a good establishment this fall as far as a lot of growth, but a lot of the losses happen here is that rye crop has continued to grow over a somewhat warmer winter season here.
Big picture, as you look at the Staedtlers and others, what would you like to see more of as it relates to trying to get this kind of technology in place with producers?
Well, I think Glenn, hit it on the head as far as the application equipment being available so that we can cover, the acres in a timely fashion. That's always key. Even at this site, a year ago, we had the ideal of top dressing our wheat with manure, and the weather didn't cooperate with us. We didn't get that plot in place. So, weather is a big variable here in relationship to actually getting the job done. But I think it's great that a lot of livestock producers are really looking to this system. It's a way to take advantage of our liquid manures out there in a very agronomic sense, and using those nutrients in an agronomic fashion for ours per se in relationship to manure application. We even have some interest in research with some of the dry manure products and going out in that same fashion to try and take advantage of the nutrients in the best fashion that we can. And, doing that certainly has some water quality implications, and I think we can make some advances. Since we're so focused about phosphorus up in that watershed, I think one thing that we do need to mention is the ideal that really we didn't see a lot of elevation of phosphorus by making this 6,000 gallon manure application out there. Really, we didn't see soil test levels jump dramatically. They were very comparable on the UAN and the manure side. So phosphorus with a single application isn't going to go out of whack in relationship to soil test levels and then risk from an environmental loss standpoint.
From a soil test standpoint, when you look at that soil test, does anything stand out, or does anything jump out at you as it relates to this is really resembling a large portion of the state soil, or is there something unique about it that it really doesn't reflect that many other soils like it?
Now, Anthony's got the same situation that most farmers in the state of Ohio do in relationship to managing soil test phosphorus levels. His soil test levels are in that agronomic range, probably on the upper end of that agronomic range, but certainly something that we can manage manure effectively in that system, take advantage of the full range of 17 or actually 14 essential nutrients that are coming out of manure that go in to help support crop production. So we can do a good job with manure out there and do it in a fashion that really makes economic and environmental sense.
And this has to be a type of manure that is largely water-based.
That's going to work best. We tend to have a higher nutrient concentration, but particularly the nitrogen side of the equation. And we're able to maintain that nitrogen in that liquid system and take full advantage of it out in the field. Helps us balance that nutrient of, to crop need from a phosphorus standpoint. So that really is ideal for this purpose of in-crop application.
If we should happen to have a wet spring, which doesn't seem at all likely based on all the conversations this year, but what does the additional liquid manure do in a wet season, and is that a concern at all?
In a wet season, not really. I mean, once again, we're only talking about 6,000 gallons, a quarter of an acre inch of water. So it's not going to be anything that's going to be dramatically impactful from that standpoint. It's just so beneficial in that dry year to have just that little bit of extra moisture out there.
Glenn, I'm going to come back to you for a second. You talked a little bit about the equipment. What size or how many row piece of equipment did you actually end up using?
Well, we used one of our university 12-row manure applicators. You had asked earlier about what we'd like to see in the future at some point, and there's a really nice system developed by the Cadman company that they do a hard hose application and would give us, perhaps instead of the 35-day window we have now for side dressing, we think we could go up to as many as 70 days. And so we're looking at a unit with them. We're looking for some funding for it, but that would be a 16-row applicator if we get that.
Is that about as big as you can get realistically, 16, or, what's the limitation there?
I think the challenge of transport down the road, the challenge of pulling the hose, getting things turned around on the end, I think 12 to 16 is fine. And today with the auto steer and the precision planting that we have, we can match up to about any unit. So a farmer could certainly build a smaller unit of his own if he chose to, or bought a used one, and still make that work pretty effectively for him.
Anthony, any final comments as you look out there? Cover crops, how do they look this time of the year? You happy with what you're seeing? I mean, it's a foggy, wet kind of winter here in Ohio, not necessarily a snow-covered, deep freeze kind of year.
Yeah, our summer applied cover crops look great. Our oilseed radishes, they've gotten enough of cold to be able to start their decomposing and everything. So people around the countryside are starting to smell the nice oilseed radish smell that we get. But everything else seemed to be doing really good. Was a little bit surprised our rye didn't take off as well as what it did here in the late fall time, winter time with the crop, with the weather that we've had, the temperatures. But we've got to stand there. So this spring, as soon as we start to warm up, that rye should really take off. And I look forward to seeing what we've got. We're always trying different mixes and seeing what we can do. So I'm interested to get the planter rolling here and get 2020 behind us. And I'd like to say 21 will be a lot better, but as we found out in 19, 20 said hold my beer. So I guess we'll go from there.
Thank you for joining us. Again, we've had Greg Arnold, Field Specialist, OSU Extension, Manure Management Systems, Anthony Staedtler of Staedtler Farms, Greg Labarge, Field Specialist, Agronomic Systems, OSU Extension, all part of the Blanchard River demonstration projects, and we appreciate all the effort that you put in.